Most people never think about their pancreas until something goes wrong. But hidden inside your body, this small organ is doing the heavy lifting, keeping your blood sugar in check, making sure your cells get energy and protecting you from diseases you don't even see coming. The secret is in your blood work. Today, I want to show you which blood test results really tell the truth about your pancreas and why they matter more at your doctor's office. Come to mind first. The pancreas rarely makes that list. It's a quiet player, tucked behind your stomach, rarely drawing attention to itself. Yet, it carries out some of the most essential work in your body. Without it, you wouldn't be able to properly digest your food, and you wouldn't be able to regulate your blood sugar. It works silently, without complaint, until it starts to fail. And by the time you notice, often it's already too late. Think of your body as a bustling city that runs on energy. The food you eat is the fuel, like electricity, for the city. But raw energy can't just flow unchecked, or the whole system burns out. You need an energy manager, someone who can receive the fuel, break it down, and distribute it evenly so that every part of the city gets what it needs. That manager is your pancreas. It's both the factory that produces enzymes to help break down food and the accountant that keeps track of how much sugar is in your bloodstream. On one side, the pancreas is pouring out digestive enzymes, breaking fats, proteins, and carbohydrates into smaller, usable parts. Without those enzymes, a steak or a piece of bread would just sit in your gut, half digested, never releasing the nutrients your cells need. On the other side, the pancreas is constantly monitoring your blood sugar, sending out insulin when levels rise and glucagon when levels fall. Insulin is like the key that unlocks your cells to let sugar in, and glucagon is the release valve that makes sure your blood sugar doesn't sink too low. Both hormones work in a fine balance, a seesaw adjusted second by second. The reason the pancreas is so overlooked is that its work is invisible. You don't feel insulin moving through your blood. You don't notice enzymes dissolving a piece of bread in your small intestine. It's silent, seamless, until it isn't. And when it fails, the consequences are serious. Diabetes, pancreatitis, pancreatic cancer, these are not small disruptions. They're life-changing conditions, and in many cases, they develop after years of silent stress on the pancreas. That's why blood tests matter so much. They act like an early warning system, showing stress signals long before symptoms show up. Imagine if your car engine could whisper to you months before a breakdown. You'd have time to fix it, replace a part, change the oil, and prevent disaster. Blood tests do the same for your pancreas. Elevated insulin, rising fasting glucose, changes in liver enzymes. These are whispers from your pancreas saying it's under pressure. And if you listen early, you can act before damage becomes permanent. The real danger is that most people don't get these tests checked. Or if they do, they only look at a single number. A normal fasting glucose, for example, might make you think your pancreas is healthy. But underneath, it may be working overtime, flooding your bloodstream with insulin just to keep that number stable. By the time glucose rises, the pancreas may have already been in distress for years. That's the tragedy of ignoring this organ. The pancreas gives you signals. It doesn't shut down overnight. It slowly weakens cell by cell until on one day the system tips over. But the good news is, by paying attention early, you can prevent that collapse. You can ease its workload with diet, with lifestyle, with awareness. Would you like me to now expand this into the full 900-word narrative in Dr. Lustig's tone, or keep giving you these compact versions first for each prompt? When a doctor orders a blood test to check your sugar, the first number they usually look at is your fasting blood glucose. It's simple, cheap, and quick, and it gives a snapshot of how much sugar is floating around in your bloodstream after you haven't eaten for at least 8 hours. The idea is straightforward. If the number is too high, that's a red flag for diabetes, and if it's normal, you're in the clear. But that's not the full picture, because this one measurement can make things look better than they really are. Imagine your pancreas as a worker trying to keep your blood sugar steady. Every time you eat, your blood sugar rises. The pancreas responds by releasing insulin, which pushes sugar into your cells for energy or storage. If your cells aren't very responsive because of insulin resistance, the pancreas has to pump out even more insulin just to keep your blood sugar normal. So when you go for a fasting test, your sugar may look perfectly fine, but behind the scenes, your pancreas has been working overtime to hold that number in range. Think of it like a student who crams all night to get an A on a test. You only see the grade, not the exhaustion, the stress, the coffee, and the sleepless hours that went into achieving it. A normal fasting glucose is like that A. It tells you nothing about how hard the pancreas had to work to get there. The body can compensate for years, but compensation has a price. Over time, the cells in the pancreas tire out. They lose their ability to make enough insulin, and that's when the fasting glucose finally starts to rise. By then, a lot of damage has already been done. This is where the idea of hidden hyperglycemia comes in. During the day, after meals, your blood sugar may spike much higher than normal, even if your fasting test looks fine. These spikes can be damaging, setting off inflammation, harming blood vessels, and forcing the pancreas into high gear. But unless you measure your blood sugar after meals or wear a continuous glucose monitor, you never see these swings. It's like checking traffic on a quiet Sunday morning and assuming the roads are always that clear. You miss the weekday rush hour chaos, the stop and go jams, the pileups. Everyday life gives plenty of examples. A person might go for a routine checkup, see a fasting glucose of 95, and think everything is fine. Later that day, they grab a muffin and a soda at lunch. Their blood sugar spikes to 160 or 180, but no one measures it. The pancreas scrambles to pour out insulin, keeping it from climbing higher. On paper, that person looks healthy. In reality, their pancreas is stressed, and those repeated spikes are quietly wearing it down. The problem is that fasting glucose only shows stability at rest. It's like checking a heart rate while someone is sitting on the couch and assuming they'll do fine running a marathon. The real test is how the body handles stress, like how blood sugar responds to food. That's why many people with so-called normal fasting glucose are surprised to find years later that they've developed diabetes seemingly out of nowhere. It wasn't out of nowhere. The signs were there, hidden in the effort the pancreas was making every single day to keep things looking normal. Would you like me to take this further into a full-length Lustig style 900-word storytelling expansion for this prompt? The way we'd build the whole speech? Or should I keep these concise narrative drafts for each point first? When most people hear about blood sugar tests, The one that sounds the most reassuring is HbA1c. Doctors like it because it offers a longer-term view, a kind of 3-month average of blood sugar rather than a single moment in time. Instead of a snapshot, it's more like a movie reel showing what your glucose has been doing day in and day out. On the surface, that makes it sound like the gold standard for understanding pancreatic health. But the story is more complicated, and the number can sometimes give a false sense of security. Here's how it works. Sugar in your blood attaches itself to proteins, and one of the easiest proteins to track is hemoglobin, the same protein that carries oxygen in your red blood cells. Once sugar sticks to hemoglobin, it stays there until the red blood cell is recycled, which is about 3 months. So by measuring how much sugar is stuck to hemoglobin, you get a sense of how much sugar your blood has been carrying around over that time. Higher percentages mean your average blood sugar has been higher, and lower percentages mean it's been lower. That's why HbA1c is often used to diagnose diabetes and monitor treatment. But averages can hide the truth. Imagine a student who gets 3 test scores, 140 and 60. The average is 67, which looks decent enough. But that doesn't show you the volatility, the highs and lows, the inconsistency. HbA1c works the same way. Someone might have blood sugar that swings up to 200 after a meal and drops back down to normal later. Another person might stay steady at 120 all the time. Both can end up with the same HbA1c result, but their risks are very different. Those swings, the roller coaster spikes and crashes, put enormous strain on the pancreas and the rest of the body, yet the average makes it look like everything is fine. Processed food plays a big role in this problem. A diet loaded with refined starches and added sugars creates sharp spikes in blood sugar. A soda or a bag of chips might drive your glucose sky high for an hour or two, then insulin kicks in and it drops back down. If you only look at the HbA1c, the number may still seem reasonable because the sugar doesn't stay elevated all day. But those repeated spikes are toxic. They generate inflammation, they damage blood vessels, and they keep the pancreas working at full throttle just to maintain control. It's a little like looking at the average speed of 2 drivers. One drives at a steady 50 miles an hour. The other races at 100, slams the brakes to 20, then accelerates back to 90. Both might average out to 50 over the course of a trip, but which driver is putting more strain on the engine, the brakes, and the whole system? That second driver is wearing down the car, even though the average speed looks the same. Your pancreas experiences the same wear and tear with glucose swings, and HbA1c can't always capture that. There's another catch. HbA1c can be influenced by things that have nothing to do with glucose at all. If you have anemia, kidney disease, or conditions that affect the lifespan of your red blood cells, your HbA1c may look artificially low or high. That means someone with serious blood sugar issues could still be told their number is fine, while someone else might look pre-diabetic, even if their pancreas is working normally. This is why relying on HbA1c alone is misleading. It's useful, but it's only part of the story. A good result doesn't guarantee your pancreas isn't under stress, especially if your diet is full of refined carbohydrates and sugary foods that create those hidden spikes. What the number hides is the effort your pancreas is making in the background, pushing out insulin meal after meal to flatten the curve. By the time HbA1c starts to climb, Your pancreas has already been working overtime for years. When people go in for blood work, they usually get their cholesterol checked, maybe their fasting glucose, sometimes HbA1c if the doctor suspects a problem. What almost never gets measured is fasting insulin. And yet, this one test can often tell you more about the health of your pancreas than any of the others. Insulin is the hormone that does the heavy lifting of moving sugar from your blood into your cells. Without it, you couldn't use food for energy and your blood sugar would skyrocket. But because doctors are trained to focus on glucose, not insulin, the messenger often gets ignored, even though it may be the first sign that something is going wrong. Insulin is a bit like a delivery worker knocking on your door. When everything is normal, the knock is gentle and the cells open up and take in the sugar. But when your cells start to resist because of too much fat inside them, too much inflammation, or simply too much energy coming in day after day, the knock has to get louder. The pancreas sends more insulin, knocking harder and harder, until eventually it's pounding on the door. At that point, your glucose might still look normal because the door is still opening, but it's taking a lot more force to get the job done. This is insulin resistance in action, and fasting insulin is the number that can reveal it before glucose even begins to climb. The irony is that by the time glucose is high enough to raise alarm, insulin has often been elevated for years. Your pancreas has been quietly working overtime, producing more and more of this hormone to overcome the resistance. Measuring fasting insulin exposes that hidden workload. If the level is high, it tells you that your cells are no longer listening to gentle knocks and the pancreas is straining to keep up appearances. That's why fasting insulin is such an important marker of early metabolic dysfunction. It shows the effort, not just the outcome. Everyday life provides a clear picture. Imagine two people who both have a fasting glucose of 90, well within the normal range. One has a fasting insulin of 5, the other a fasting insulin of 25. On paper, their glucose looks the same, but in reality, their metabolic health is worlds apart. The first person's cells are sensitive to insulin, so the pancreas can whisper and still get the job done. The second person's cells are resistant, so the pancreas has to shout. Over time, that shouting burns out the beta cells, and eventually the pancreas can't keep up anymore. That's when glucose begins to rise and diabetes is finally diagnosed. But the damage started long before the glucose test revealed it. So why don't doctors measure fasting insulin more often? Part of the reason is habit. Medical training has centered on glucose for decades, and treatment guidelines are built around glucose thresholds. Insurance companies don't always reimburse for insulin testing, so it doesn't become part of standard panels. And sometimes doctors don't know what to do with the information since there aren't official cutoffs that everyone agrees on. But from a biological standpoint, ignoring fasting insulin is like watching only the scoreboard without noticing how hard the players are struggling on the field. You miss the early warning signs of exhaustion. The messenger analogy makes it simple to understand. If insulin is the messenger, then resistance is the closed door. A healthy cell opens easily when insulin arrives, just like a homeowner answering a soft knock. But when the house is cluttered, the windows are locked, and the door is jammed, the knock has to get louder. Insulin pounds away meal after meal, day after day, until either the messenger collapses from exhaustion or the door breaks under the strain. Either way, it's a problem that could have been spotted earlier if someone had simply listened to the sound of the knocking. Most people are told to pay attention to blood sugar, but blood sugar is only half the story. What really matters is how hard the pancreas has to work to keep that blood sugar in check. That's where something called IOMA-IR comes in. It stands for homeostatic model assessment of insulin resistance, but in plain language, it's just a way to measure how sensitive or resistant your body is to insulin by looking at both fasting glucose and fasting insulin together. Instead of just seeing the result, it shows you the effort behind the result, and that makes it one of the clearest windows into pancreatic strain before diabetes ever shows up. Imagine a student who turns in a perfect homework assignment. On the surface, it looks like everything is going well. But what if that student stayed up all night, made 3 drafts, erased and rewrote every page just to get it right? The final grade is fine, but the effort tells a different story. Blood glucose alone is like that grade. IOMA-IR is the behind. The scenes look at how much work it took to get there. When the number is high, it means your pancreas is shouting with extra insulin just to maintain a normal sugar level. Here's a story that makes this clear. Think of a man in his early 40s who goes in for a yearly checkup. His fasting glucose comes back at 92, perfectly normal. The doctor pats him on the back and says, everything looks great. But suppose this man's fasting insulin is also measured and it comes back high, around 18. If you plug those 2 numbers into the OMA-IR formula, it tells a very different story. His cells are resistant. His pancreas is working double time, and his metabolic health is already sliding in the wrong direction. He doesn't feel any different. So he goes about life as usual, still eating processed foods, still drinking the occasional soda, still carrying a little extra weight around the middle. For years, his glucose stays in the normal range, so every checkup feels reassuring. But what's happening silently is that his pancreas is getting tired. It can't keep pounding the door forever. After 5 or 6 years, his fasting glucose finally creeps up into the prediabetic range, and now the doctor starts paying attention. But the truth is, the process started long before. OMA-IR would have shown the strain back when the standard glucose test gave the illusion of health. This is why HOMA-IR is so valuable. It catches the hidden phase of metabolic disease when intervention can make the biggest difference. It's a way of spotting the smoke before the fire spreads. By looking at the relationship between insulin and glucose together, you see the workload your pancreas is carrying, not just the outcome it produces. A person with normal glucose but high HOMA-IR is like a dam holding back a river. From the outside, the water level looks calm, but inside the structure, cracks are forming under pressure. Without relief, the dam will eventually give way. The beauty is that lowering HOMA-IR doesn't require waiting for a prescription. Changes in diet, especially cutting down refined sugars and processed starches, losing visceral fat, and improving sleep and movement can restore insulin sensitivity. That takes pressure off the pancreas and buys back years of health. But to make those changes, you have to know the strain is there, and that's what this test provides. When the pancreas makes insulin, it doesn't release it all by itself. It actually produces a larger molecule that splits into 2 parts, insulin and C-peptide. Every time insulin is released, An equal amount of C peptide comes along for the ride. That makes C peptide a kind of fingerprint of insulin production. By measuring it, you can see not just how much insulin is floating in the blood, but how much the pancreas is actually making. In a way, it tells you how full the pancreas reserve tank is and whether that tank is running low or working overtime. If the C peptide level is low, it usually means the pancreas isn't producing much insulin at all. That can happen when the insulin-producing beta cells are damaged or exhausted, like in type 1 diabetes or in late stage type 2 when the pancreas has finally burned out. Low C peptide is like looking at a car with the fuel gauge on empty. The tank has been drained and there's nothing left to give. For someone living with diabetes, this means insulin injections often become necessary because the body simply can't make enough of its own. On the other hand, if the C peptide level is very high, that's a different kind of problem. It means the pancreas is producing plenty of insulin, maybe even too much. This usually happens in the early and middle stages of insulin resistance. When the cells aren't responding to insulin properly, the pancreas tries to compensate by making more and more, flooding the bloodstream just to keep glucose in range. High C peptide is like an engine revving at maximum RPM. The car is still moving, but the strain is unsustainable. If it keeps going like that, eventually the engine wears down. Everyday life can make this picture clearer. Imagine two people with the same blood sugar reading, say 100. One has a C peptide of 0.5, the other has a C peptide of 4. The first person's pancreas is barely functioning, struggling to produce insulin at all. The second person's pancreas is working overtime, pouring out insulin in excess. The glucose number looks the same, but the stories behind them couldn't be more different. One is dealing with depletion, the other with overwork, and both are at risk if the problem isn't recognized. This is why C peptide is so powerful. It doesn't just tell you where your blood sugar is today. It tells you how your pancreas is coping behind the scenes. Low means the reserve tank is nearly empty. High means the reserve tank is overflowing because the body isn't listening to the signals properly. Either way, the number reveals stress that simple glucose tests can't capture. It's a reminder that the pancreas can whisper its struggles long before blood sugar begins